えー皆さん、こんにちは。ファン研究グループの動画シリーズです。本日は、シンガポールより、CT リムさんをお招きして、シンガポールにおける漫画、コミックの、歴史と現在の、コミックのファンダムの様子についてお話しいただきます。では、早速、CT リムさん、よろしくお願いいたします。
Hi, nice to meet everyone. Hi, all. Thanks for joining us. Of course, you'll be watching this much later, but right now, I think it's end of the year, holiday season. So thanks for everyone who joined in. Of course, for Koki for organizing this. So yeah, I enjoy sharing. All right, because I think that there should be more connectivity. We keep talking about world peace and what's happening in the Middle East, in Europe, right, and all the troubles and all the wars. But so actually culture, popular culture, comics, manga can be a way of connecting people. And as I found out, all right, I made good friends for the last 20 years or so, all right, from all over, from Japan, from Philippines, of course, Malaysia, Indonesia, even Vietnam recently. So it is a way of connecting, right, of common interests, and not just comics, it's even music also, my other passion in life, great passion in life. So I always find that such opportunities to share, they are important, and I gladly take it up. So thanks again for everything. So my short sharing is on Singapore comics and cartoons. And let me go to the slide. So maybe just to explain, I prepared a deck of slides which I will share, but I feel that comics manga is visual. So I have some materials on the internet, which then I will toggle between my deck and my desktop to show you the websites. And there'll be some videos, and I will share the links later so that you can read them and watch them at your own leisure. All right, especially all these web links. Right, then it's more dynamic, more interactive. So let me share my slides now. And a bit about myself. I probably listen to too much punk, hardcore, and metal music for my own good at this age of mine. But nonetheless, I feel that many things you can do a bit later, right? I mean, reading, even when we are a bit older, you have glasses and you have to, if you have to go for some eye surgery correction, you can. But to watch a gig, a visual experience, you need the health to do it. So I've been attending gigs and all that. So I'm trying to do that as much as possible while I still can. And of course, the comics reading continue, and the comics reading can continue at a later stage. So I write about history and popular culture, and that's why it's not just about comics, but it's about music, and I'm also interested in films, right? Yeah. But we only live one lifetime, lah, as for all of us. I'm the comics editor for the last, I don't know, last 20 years or so for Singapore, for the International Journal of Comic Art, edited by John Land in Philadelphia, America. I'm the co-editor of two Southeast Asian comics anthologies. So my interest is really on Southeast Asia, right? I mean, there are many people looking at North American comics, European comics, of course, East Asian comics. I feel that, okay, I'm a history teacher, and sometimes I feel that students, they pay more attention to the outside world, right? Especially America, Europe, East Asia, Japan, Korea, K-Wave, China, but actually within our region, Southeast Asia, where Singapore is situated, and our own backyard, as I always call it, there are many things happening. So my focus is really on Singapore, of course, where I'm living, where I'm from, and Southeast Asia. So okay. So later on I'll show you the cover, but basically this is Liquid City, all right, volume 2, which I co-edited with Sunny Liu, and this is in 2010. It's an anthology of Southeast Asian comics, published by Image Comics. It was nominated for Eisner, but of course I didn't win. We didn't win. I didn't quit my day job. Life continues. No one gets rich from doing comics. All right. And last year, I did a second one, and this is called Community. All right. This is done with Paulo Harris in Manila, Philippines. It's part of the Philippines International Comic Art Festival, part of Comic Cat. And so both are on Southeast Asian comics. All right. I also write comic books. So this is the first one I did was Guidebook to Nanyang Diplomacy. All right. Later I'll be showing some images. It's drawn by a friend of mine called Benjamin Chi. So this came out, I think, in N 2017. And 2 years ago, this came out, drawn to satire, sketches of cartoonists in Singapore. So it's based on my research on Singapore cartoonists, comic artists. So it's a comic book about comic book. And then I curate shows, I organize events, panels, and all these books were self-publishing. I will talk a bit about that. And of course, when you self-publish, you also do selling as well, because in Singapore's case, you're such a small country that it may not make sense, or it may not make good business sense to go through a distributor. All right. So basically, we self-publish. We are our own distributor. We go straight to the bookshops because, again, Singapore is small, right? I'm not saying you do this for all countries. Big countries, big cities, you may still need a distributor, but you will roughly know, right? If you go with a publisher, all right, it's about, let's say, 30%. You go with a distributor, it's another 30%. The bookshop will take another 30%. That leaves you 10%. So right now, our model is, if I self-publish, I self-distribute, I still need the bookshops, all right? So, but at least I'm getting almost 66, more than 60%, all right? And then, of course, I'll share it with my artists and all that, right? So I'll talk a bit more about that. You can ask me questions about that later. And I also do more history-related, serious books, right? On history and politics, nation building, early years of nationhood, or anti-colonial movement in Singapore, the University Socialist Club, Tangled Strands of Modernity. I'm one of the co-authors. That came up maybe about 13, 14 years ago. So that's more on the fight for independence in Singapore, all right? Yeah. And I'm not sure whether you can see an image, but there's a drawing of me there by a friend of ours called Suraya in Malaysia. Okay, so a brief history of comics and cartoons in Singapore. So the bulk of it is taken from a four-part series on history of comics and cartoons in Singapore, which I wrote. I will show it to you later. Now, after this, I'm going to toggle to the website. But the point I want to make here is that the history of Singapore, or the history of comics in Singapore, cannot be divorced from Malaysia. And some of you in the audience right now are in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and you will know a bit about the history. It is entangled, all right? It's tangled and entangled. And I think, it is part of our history. It's part of our how we came about, and we should not ignore it, all right? So again, back to the point I'm making earlier on, if the young people of Singapore, the students of Singapore, if they do not know as much about Malaysia, all right, and if they know more about America and Japan and Korea and England, but they do not know so much about Malaysia, that is a pity. That would be very sad, right? And that actually is not good, because what happens next door to us is actually much more important than what happens far, far away. Not that what Trump is doing or what's happening in the Middle East doesn't concern us. It's very important, but we should really pay attention to our immediate neighbors. And I'm talking about Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Jakarta in Indonesia, for example, just to list two. And Thailand is not just Bangkok. Indonesia is not just Bali. It's so much more. All right. And of course, I'll be talking about issues of chronology, geography, and representation. So let me toggle to the website, and then there'll be graphics there and all that. So later I'll share the link, but basically sgcartoonhub.com is a website that I did with some friends some years ago. We got some funding, all right, to mount this, and we organize events, sort of a comics festival that ran for about a month or more than a month at a shopping mall, based on a shopping mall. Every weekend we have activities, we have sharing, demo, artist sharing, artist lessons, teaching lessons and all that. So when I started writing this article, and this article was written about more than 10 years ago, it was for a book that in the end I didn't participate. I didn't think it came out either. But really, when you talk about history of Singapore and Malaysia, it is together, all right, in many ways. All right, you cannot isolate it. And of course, history of comics and cartoons in Singapore and Malaysia. Actually, it's the same if you want to talk about the history of music, or the history of films, or the history of literature. All right, up to a certain point, both have to be considered together. All right, so there are three key issues. All right, issue of chronology, geography, and representation. And so where do we start, right? Do we start, let's say, from Singapore and Malaysia are former British colonies. Are you saying that there is no art, there's no literature, or there's no, okay, comics, of course, is a relative modern invention, but you cannot say that there's no history before coming of the West, right? Before colonialism. Definitely there was a history, a rich and strong history before the 19th century, all right? So we must always consider that. Then moving away from that, from, let's say, for Singapore, 1819, from Malaya in the 19th century, where is our starting point? Do we start, let's say, after World War II, all right, after the Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia, 1945, or in the case of Malaysia, do you start with 1957 when Malaya became independent? Do you start in 63 with the formation of Malaysia, which is Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, Sarawak, right? And that's Malaysia. Or for in Singapore's case, do we start in 1965 when we become fully independent from Malaysia, where we left Malaysia, right? So all these are starting points, or ending points in some ways. But these are a bit artificial to me, right? It's a bit artificial because the history is still entangled. Many of the publishing, distribution are still entwined for a long time, even after 65. And not forgetting that, all right, we are using nation state as a definition. So we talk about Malaysian comics, right? Is it 57 onwards, 63 onwards, 65 onwards? But in actual fact, again, the concept of a nation state is, some people say, is sort of 18th century, right, with the French Revolution. But before that, the place exists, and the place will have its own history, its own art, its own culture, right? So I'm not going to be too sticky about it, all right? But these are just convenient starting points or ending points. But we need to be conscious of it, all right? We just cannot just take it as face value that, okay, Malaysian comics, you want to study, you just start from 1957. We have to look, before that, before World War II, before World War I, 19th century, because there are examples. And similarly for Singapore. Okay, geography, I think I may have touched a bit more about this. Again, I do not want to over-privilege the metropolitan, all right? So even within the British Malay states, there are key areas, of course. Of course, those of you in KL, Kuala Lumpur, that's one key area, all right? Culturally, politically, all right, artistically. But in the 19th century, the key areas are actually not so much in KL, which is in a way only came out as a capital much later, but we are talking about Singapore, all right? Really the port cities where really the British place a lot of emphasis on money, investments, and of course Penang, all right? That's why I state Singapore and Penang, okay? And I would say Kuala Lumpur, Johor Bahru will be slightly later. So if you look at the history of books, publishing, writing, literature, right? Because these are the larger umbrella, which you could say comics fall under. Therefore, the key areas are, for printing, distribution, is really Singapore, and I would say Penang. But of course, if new research come along, I'll stand corrected. But right now, from what I know, is these two key areas in the 19th century and into the early 20th century. And because, again, you look at the geography and even the old street names or even the current street names, all right, of Singapore, because many from the region would come to Singapore before waiting for the winds to change to go to the Middle East for their Hajj. So that's why you have Haji Lane in Singapore, you have Arab Street, all right, you have the Sultan Mosques all around. It's quite near the coastline, all right, because all these people from Indonesia, East Indies and whatever, all right, they will come to Singapore to wait for the winds to change, of course, buy their goods for a long journey, and then they will sail or travel to the Middle East for the Hajj, right? So that's why the printing center in 19th century at least, all right, was in Singapore, all right? But like I said, when I start up, I do not want to over-privilege this because I'm sure there are other areas and to say that Singapore, the center of I know arts, culture, or even comics, I think that's a too big a claim, all right? But we can start from there and then we expand. So therefore, one important development for comics and cartoons in Singapore slash Malaya is actually the founding of the NAFA Academy of Fine Arts in 1938 in Singapore, and which is still around. They still exist. I mean, recently they tie up with LaSalle College and they formed the University Arts Singapore, UAS. All right, so it's still around, long history. 1938. Of course, they did not have any comics or cartoon classes or teachers teaching that. But what they have is they taught, of course, fine art. A lot of it is very, it's a very Chinese syllabus. But if you remember, in 1938, it was the start of the Sino-Japanese War. And many artists in China were sort of, part of this movement of, you could say, in the war of resistance against the Japanese. So not just soldiers, not just the ordinary people, but artists, theater, drama, art, posters, murals, cartoons. All right, so you could see the link. All right, so there's a link, and I'm sure some of you might know the history, right? Artists like Feng Zikai, Liao Bingxiong, Zhang Leping, all right, San Mao Liu Langji, all this is very famous pioneer cartoonists in China, and they were involved in the war of resistance. And these ideas, these influences seep into Southeast Asia. All right, I'll just focus on Singapore, Malaya, and a large part of them was centered around NAFA. So many of the teachers in NAFA, Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, were very influenced by these ideas, the idea of art for society's sake. All right, not just art for art's sake, but art for society's sake. It is to improve society. It is to fight a war, in this case here in 1938. And so, of course, when you want to reach out to the masses, you just cannot be drawing or painting portraits, oil paintings, and put in galleries and in school, right? You want your art to go to the streets. So actually, that's why things like cartoons, things like woodcuts were very powerful. I'm giving you quite a long and rambling context overview, but I'm a history teacher. Context is everything. All right. Context and text, they both come together. I'm not even gone into the history yet, but this is the context. This is why Singapore, in that sense, is important because it was the center for publishing, printing, distribution, education. All right. And people traveling from China. All right. And not forgetting, you have constant wave of people from China coming to find work, because of troubles in China, because of famine in the 18th, 19th century, and of course in the early 20th century war. So it's a constant stream. So many of these artists, art teachers end up in Singapore. Okay, not just in Singapore. I'm sure they're in other parts of Malaya as well. Some could be in Penang, for example. All right, but that's another different research. I'm just focusing on Singapore. They formed NAFA, Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, and Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts took in students not just from Singapore, but for the rest of Malaya. I believe it is the first, or it could be the first, one of the first art schools, Chinese art schools in this region. All right. I've not done further research. I'm not sure whether they took in students from, let's say, Indonesia, all right, the East Indies. Yeah, but it'll be interesting. I won't be surprised if they did because, what we have is this network of overseas Chinese centers, right, in Southeast Asia. And if you read Wang Gangwu, you'll know some of that. So Singapore, in that sense, is an important case study because it's a lot of things center around here. Okay, so geography is one. Okay, so this is old, not that old. I think in the 80s, I've seen this. This is probably taken in the 80s or 70s. The NAFA Middle Road campus. This building is still there. It's still there, but it's been remodeled, repurposed for, I think, as a Singapore Design Center. And of course, representation. I think this is important in today's context. Okay, so what is the Malaysian or Singapore comic artist or cartoonist, right? It's not as simple, right? Even in the American comic artists, right? It's not just white Anglo-Saxon, all right? But you have Asian American, Jin Yang. You have Afro-American as well. So and same lens, right? And I said, what sort of medium he or she should be working? Is it in English, Chinese, Malay, or Indian? And can we speak of a Malaysian or Singapore artist before 63 or 65? So I'll use an example. The most famous, all right, and probably the most powerful comic artist in Singapore today is this guy called Sunny Liu, who used to be a Malaysian citizen. All right. So yeah, I think right now it's a knowledge. He has taken up Singapore citizenship. We say there's a Singapore artist, but this is just one example where it's not so clear sometimes. So we have other writers, comic writers and artists who are in Singapore, but actually they are Singaporean permanent residents. They still hold Malaysian passport. So are they Malaysian artists or, yeah, all these things were, yeah. So again, I just probably very academic, right? Right? We don't have a fixed answer. We're trying not to be definitive about it. All right. So I've come across conferences and I have some issues with it on Sinophone comics and then they use Sunny Liu as example of Sinophone comics in Singapore and Southeast Asia. And then my argument to them is that, but the thing is, I don't think Sunny identified himself as a Chinese comic artist. I mean, you can say he's a comic artist from Singapore, but he is educated in English schools. He went Cambridge. Even I couldn't qualify to Cambridge. All right, he did his masters. He has the means. All right, he has the means. The family is quite well to do a master's in Rhode Island, USA. So what I'm saying is that it is a English education he had. All right, a very solid English or education in English. All right, so to say that he's a Chinese comic artist, I'm scratching my head. All right, and so similarly, you have, people ask me, are there Indian comic artists in Singapore? Say yes, there are, but they are writing in English. All right, the comics they do is like any other comics by anyone else. All right, it's not in Tamil or in Hindi, and the stories are superhero stories. It's not particularly unless they choose to incorporate their own heritage, myths and culture. But it's like any other comic. So this idea that this is a Malay artist, this is a Chinese artist, this is an Indian artist, it doesn't really make sense unless the works express that, right? Or unless the artist saying, yes, I'm very consciously producing this as a Malay comic book, right? But other than that, such definitions are not very useful. And I think as researchers, we need to be very conscious. I think it's similar in Kuala Lumpur. All right. I don't know whether you all attend Comic Fiesta, which just happened, I think, last weekend or so in Kuala Lumpur. And just because they are drawing in a manga style doesn't mean that they are not Malaysian artists, right? It's not true. But to further say that, therefore they are Chinese, Malay, Indian drawing, sometimes it's not very useful. It's not very useful. So our units of analysis, our research needs to be a bit more nuanced, more complex than that. Okay, so very long intro for just this part one, but I thought it's some issues that we need to grapple with. Okay, this is part two, and it's more about the early comics and cartoons. Okay, so this one is more straightforward. Okay, so I think what I want to say here is that before coming to the West, you do have writing, you do have drawings in this area. All right, so not everything is because of the British, but of course the impact of colonialism, the influences, the impact cannot be denied. All right, I think the idea of print, all right, or mass printing, the spread of ideas did come about much more strongly in the 19th century. The main newspaper in Singapore is called the Straits Times. Of course, when Singapore and Malaysia split, part of it went to Kuala Lumpur and it became the New Straits Times, which you still have. And why is it called the Straits Times? It's because it's about news about shipping, the Straits. All right, Singapore was a port city, so you can make the connection. And of course, they start producing, reproducing some cartoons. You have the Strait Produce, as I mentioned here in 1868. And I suspect they were influenced by Punch magazine from the UK, but it's not direct influence. I would argue that actually it could be imitations or subsidiaries of Punch, Japan Punch, which appeared in 1862, China Punch 1867, and therefore you have Straits Produce, which try to imitate that in 1868. So again, it's not so clear cut, all right? It's not a direct say things only start with the coming of the British. We had things before that, but the coming of the British, you do have you do see more connections. Right. Then then of course the whole idea of central and peripheral, right? I think it's something we need to explore. The first Chinese and Malay cartoons, very quickly, I'll just say that it's political. All right, for the first Chinese cartoons that appeared in the newspaper in Singapore is political because at that point in time, many of the newspapers, many of the intellectual activists were involved in the anti-Manchu, anti-Qing dynasty movement. All right, Sun Yat-sen, some of these newspapers, organization was set up in Sun Yat-sen when he visited Singapore. He was in Penang as well. I think he might be in Kuala Lumpur. I can't remember. So the cartoons they produced were all anti-Manchu, anti-Qing dynasty, right? Because they're not doing great. All right, they were corrupt, the usual dynastic issues. But slowly over time, it's not just reprinting, reproducing. There were local cartoonists who drew for these publications. All right, so again, what started off as, you could say, imitation or just reproduction, nurture local talent. And actually, that's an interesting point. Just a very quick side point. I think all countries experience piracy. I think me and Carl had a conversation about this. Experience piracy. Actually, piracy, in a way, opened the doors for more local works, right? It does. All right. I mean, you see in Kim Dong, in Vietnam, you have Chuang Yi in Singapore. I think there are examples in Malaysia as well. Yeah. So, but it's a side point. Then okay, history of cartooning. Okay, so this is just to show you the images. All right. So the image, I think if you see it on your left, all right, it is this animal, this ball, eating a bowl of rice. All right, and this is the rice bowl of the overseas Chinese. So it's like, the imperial government in China is taxing, all right, on the overseas Chinese unjustly. Okay, so you have things like that. So of course, you could also say they are partly propaganda, like, is to make the overseas Chinese angry so that they give more support to the revolutionaries to overthrow the Qing dynasty, right? So again, not to take things at 100% face value, right? I mean, cartoons are meant to produce an effect in the readers. It's not neutral. It's never neutral, right? It's not an illustration. It's not just to illustrate an article, but it is to present a point of view. That's why I always argue that cartoonists are like journalists. They are your public intellectuals. So a few more examples. Okay. The Poor Coolie, 1929, is quite small, but basically it's the image on your left, all right, is to just show the social injustice under colonial rule in the 1920s, all right. 1929, of course, Great Depression. So again, reading against history, you need to do that. And okay, both images is by Zhang Ruji, which is one of the cartoonists I researched on and I did in this book, Zhang Ruji. All right. He came from China. He was studying in France. He stopped by Singapore. He stayed on. He was supposed to go to China to teach. He taught at various schools, high schools in Singapore, set up art studios, drew for the newspapers, and especially after the Sino-Japanese War of 1937 broke out, he was very much part of the anti-Japanese movement. So the cartoon on the right, The Victory of 1939 by Zhang Ruji, that appeared in Xinzhou Rebao. All right. Of course, it's showing showing the war, the atrocities of war. And when the Japanese invaded Malaya and Singapore in early 1942, there was an operation called Sok Ching, where they rounded up and killed many Chinese. Zhang Ruji was one of them. So basically, he was never seen again. So we assume that he's dead. All right. So one of the victims of the occupation. So again, the point to be made here is all very political. All right, it's all very political. Now, Malay cartoons, just very quickly, whether it's in Singapore or Malaya, is much less so. Again, a very short history. The British, in some ways, took better care of them, all right, because they were seen as the indigenous people as compared to the immigrants from China, India. So, okay, in a very general sense, all right, almost over generalizing. They were better taken care of and maybe have less to complain about. So they were not fighting so much for independence or protesting against the situation elsewhere. Like the overseas Chinese, of course, was very interested in China. The Malay artists, of course, they do draw cartoons about social injustice, but less less angry, I would say, less angry than, let's say, the Chinese cartoons. All right. In fact, what's interesting to me is that they were more interested in the corrupting influence of Arab Muslims. All right. They feel that Malay Muslim culture was better, while Arab Muslim, okay, this is the early 20th century. Arab Muslim will smoke and drink and have other bad Western lifestyle. Today is a total reverse, right? Today, all right, Arab Muslim or Muslim practice from the Middle East is very strict, and of course, that's because of the 1979, Iranian Revolution, right? You have that. Is it 1979? Yeah, thereabouts. So it's very interesting. That's why the study of history fascinates me, right? Things change. It's topsy-turvy. It's like Stranger Things. You have the upside down world. All right, it's upside down. So as I mentioned here, they're not really fighting for Malay rights, but they're very critical of Chinese and Indian immigrants in their activism, and especially the corrupting influence of Arab Muslims. Okay, so it's more about race, identity, culture, and not so much national. All right, but after the Japanese occupation, because I think all of them suffered, and then they realized that, okay, we better stand up for ourselves. We cannot depend on the British. So there was political awakening, all right, after 1945. Okay. So some examples: Abdullah Arif, cartoonist in Penang, Malaysia, and he actually were on the side of the Japanese during the occupation, and he drew anti-Western cartoons where he made fun of Uncle Sam, all right, America and the UK, all right. So all these were drawn in September 1942, right? So yeah, so this is part of the history of cartoons in Malaya, all right, but I've included in, all right, okay, I think I'll just stop very briefly here for part 2 and just move quickly to part 3, whereby after independence, after end of the war, end of Japanese occupation, anti-colonial, pro-independence movement, Malaya gained its independence in 57, Singapore will more or less gain independence in 65. Okay, so I would say from 45 to about 57 or 65, the cartoon scene was very vibrant. All right, if you ask me, what's the history of cartooning during this period, it's very vibrant. Again, it's the same, all right, as before the war. Art for society's sake and not just art for art's sake. And cartoons were seen as tools, as part of arsenal for the people to make their voices known, to make their views known, that they want their independence from the British. All right. But as we know, and this is not uncommon, and this is not unique to Singapore, Malaya, right? In times of revolution, all right, the politician and artists will work together. All right. But after the revolution is over and independence achieved, maybe the politician might jail the artist. Right? Okay. I think this happens everywhere throughout history. All right. I mean, to various degrees. So that's why the first line of this article I wrote: independence does not necessarily equate to freedom. Freedom means freedom of speech, for example. So again, I suppose if we just put on our citizens' lens, right? Okay, and say, okay, yes, because after independence, you have a period of nation building. You need to bring the people together. You need to build social consensus, and you cannot have artists running amok, criticizing every policy, all right, and every cartoonist or cartoons taking pot shots at politicians. So things need to consolidate, need to stabilize, and this is also what happened in Singapore, and of course, to some extent in Malaysia as well, right? And like I say, I will not say that cartoonists had the worst of it, all right? Because if you look at the political history, of post-independence Singapore and Malaysia, you do have arrests or detentions for troublemakers, all right, but they are more writers, artists, theater people. Yeah, you do have, they were detained, all right, and of course, those of you in KL, you can find out a bit more about history of ISA, detention, the emergency regulation law in Malaysia. Okay, cartoonists actually very few of them got into that much trouble, right? Because in that sense, cartoonists are a bit further away, all right, as compared to journalists. Some journalists, editors were arrested. Okay, but nonetheless, cartoonists saw the writing on the wall, right? To use that imagery and metaphor, and then they felt that okay, then therefore, what I'm told is I should focus less on politics, but maybe more on humor, more on action, more on adventure comic strips. And so that's a development. All right, that is the development. And so it also makes economic sense, right? So for example, if I'm a cartoonist for a newspaper, all right, and basically my bosses, my editors are really more or less say, okay, we're going to support this nation building project, right? Then whatever I draw will never be published, right? Right? Will never be published. Or if let's say I'm a freelance cartoonist, all right, where every cartoon I draw, I submit, I get paid. Then if I draw all these critical cartoons, I submit to the newspaper and say, oh no, I don't, the art is not very good. They will not tell you the real reason, right? They'll just say, oh, it's not very good and all that. They don't publish it, and you're just losing money, right? So in the end, you're forced to draw cartoons, more humorous, right? Rather than political, you draw social cartoons instead. So in a way, it creates self-censorship, right? What for I waste my time and effort? So in that sense, unlike let's say a writer who maybe he just write and then maybe he publish, or he got publisher friends to publish, it's direct. The cartoonist has to go through intermediaries to get their cartoons out to the people. I mean, unless they're drawing cartoons on walls, right, murals, and that's like protest art. But if they are using newspapers and publications, magazines, you could see why, in that sense, they are a bit more removed, and they get the message. They get the message that the freedom to draw anything they want, to comment anything they want, it's not quite there anymore. Right? So what happened then, of course, is really if you go through the newspapers, magazines in the 70s, even 80s, a lot of humor, a lot of action, a lot of comic strips. So change, right? So I start with, and right at the start, it was political, okay, and the context for it, right, and it slowly shift to what we have, okay, to what we have. So this is in general. I will not, yeah. So you have things like LATS, which is more social, economic, yeah. Okay, and then Gila Gila, of course. Gila Gila is like the Malaysian version of Mad magazine. Like Gila means mad, right? So it's Majulah Humor National. So it's a national humor magazine. Okay, but of course, tax and context, right? So when the political situation changed, the arts changed as well. So in the 1990s, for those of you familiar with Malaysian history, you'll know that there's Reformasi, all right, Mahathir versus Anwar. Of course, right now, Anwar is the prime minister, all right, after a very long struggle, all right, he was jailed many times. And then as a result of Reformasi, political awakening, debate and discussion, you have cartoonists like Zuna, who came out and draw more hard-hitting political cartoons. Okay, I won't translate this, but basically this is a criticism of what's happening in Malaysia. Okay, and very quickly, just the final part. Okay, so this article I wrote in 2014, so I stopped there, but it is still relevant. All right, so in the case of Singapore from 65 to 14, quite similar, all right, to what was happening in Malaysia, less political, more humor, more action, more comic strips, and then so the humor would be like Mr. Kiasu, all right, very popular in Singapore, still very popular. All right, so in the 80s, you do have some political comics. And in fact, you could say that Mr. Kiasu is some sort of political commentary, okay, or more of a social commentary on how on Singapore culture, which is not very healthy, right? You know, we are scared to lose. We are, I don't know, in that sense, perhaps not we don't take risks, then therefore not very innovative. You know, not so great at critical thinking. You know, so it's a very general, social commentary. All right, it's very popular. There was a CD, cassette. I think I was in the studio then, and I was in the backing vocals for for the Kiasu song. In the 90s, there was a theater, there was TV, and so on. There is 2 TV series. Okay, and I'll share
Can
the
we
slide.
can we have a kind of short Q&A before moving to the
Sure,
slides,
sure.
because you have like already a lot of content so far. So like I was very impressed by the brief history of Singapore and Malaysian cartoonists, and I kind of have misunderstood the history. I thought the history of cartoon and the comics in Singapore originated from like Sinophone community, but when you see the entire Malay Peninsula, you see, the Malay people also had the history of and the community of comic strips and the cartoons. And yeah, I was very, kind of shocked because when you said, the Malay people in the early 20th century, they were kind of, fighting against the Arab Islamic people, who are corrupted at the time. Well, as you said, the situation is kind of reversed in the 21st century today, but that kind of political infringement or political confrontation between Arab and Malay, I wasn't aware of that kind of confrontation. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's interesting to the Malay comics and the Chinese comics originated simultaneously.
So again, I mean, my discipline is history. So to me, compare and contrast is actually very illuminative. Of course, uh, again, I want to acknowledge that all this research is really a group of us, right? It's not just me. So for example, for Malay comics, I think a very important scholar who just retired from university is Mulyadi in Kuala Lumpur. You should, maybe next time I can introduce you. All right. So
Yeah.
he is the one who did all that research. He has written books on it. So back then, what happened is a culture war. All right.
Yeah.
Where Arab Muslims were more westernized. Actually, you do not just see in cartoons. Actually, you see in some of the early Malay movies by P. Ramlee after the war. All right, you see some of it as well. Okay, so it's a culture debate, lah. It's a culture war, right? That play out in cartoons, in comics, in movies. Okay, so yeah, this slide is actually what I went through, right? It's not really a blank slate or just clean coming of the British. You do have arts and culture and all that. All right, so I need to keep that in mind. But nonetheless, we need to acknowledge the impact of colonialism, advancement of print and spiral ideas, and I know I've talked about influence of punch. All right, that's a very early example. But of course, there are also other external influences, forces, and events, right? And like I said, what's happening in China, all right, the anti Qing dynasty movement, the revolutions of Sun Yat-sen, and all this play out. So you could say that a lot of these cartoons, a lot of these events were from outside. It's really not so much about Singapore or Malaya, but it is important to the overseas Chinese here, all right, in 1907. All right. So I put a point there. How about local agency? Does it mean that there's no local agency, that forever whatever we create is a response to outside world? I would say yes and no. But over time, because of external influence, all right, people saw the power or the use of cartoons, and they find that okay, then maybe I can use cartoons to talk about local conditions. So that's why there's one cartoon there, right? Where it's 1929. Great Depression, and the coolie, the worker is very poor. So that one is really specific about the workers in Singapore, right? It's not about what's happening in China. So there is local agency, but nonetheless, the big rocks, the big things are still, for example, the Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese occupation, so on and so forth. All right. So up to that point, it's really anyway, we don't have to be purist about it. That doesn't mean that, oh, I only want to study cartoons and comics that is about local events and politics. I think we should look at in totality and how they influence each other, how they cross over with each other, right? I think that's more more rich and more fruitful and more valuable. Okay, so again, it's just a key points that I made just now. It's a wave of anti-colonial, pro-independence sentiments and movement, whereby art as a weapon, cartoons as a tool, and art for society's sake, and not for our sake. But again, the point I made just now, independence does not equate to freedom, right? You have what then is, again, I say not to make a value judgment that, oh, these cartoons are better than other cartoons. I mean, there is a history, and again, in America or in elsewhere, right? People have studied cartoons as propaganda. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. All right, so they play a function. And anyway, for so-called non-propaganda cartoons, it's not true lah. All cartoons have an agenda of a point of view. They all have an agenda to push. All right, so after independence, you have cartoons for nation building, consensus building, i.e. propaganda, which sounds like a bad word, but I think we can be more open-minded about it and study it for what it's worth. But what it led to is definitely dominance of humor, comic strips, action comic books. And in a way, it is linked to the economy of Singapore, of any country, right? You don't just study cartoons as cartoons, but how is it linked to politics? How is it linked to economy? So any of you who know about the history of Singapore, you know this, what we have in the 70s, and of course, I'm part of that. I grew up in the 70s, is the rise of the middle class as the economy takes off, right? Because in the earlier 20th century, where the concept of youth, teenagers, leisure, popular culture doesn't quite exist. I mean, not as we understand it. There's actually very little pocket money, right? I mean, it's all about excess funds, right? If your father can give you pocket money and therefore you have this pocket money, you can buy extra sweets, you can buy toys, you can buy comic books, and that is where a market will emerge. But if the society is poor, it doesn't mean that there's no cartoons and comics, right? It's just that the cartoons will only be in newspapers and magazines. And then, you know, people have access to these cartoons when their parents buy the newspapers, right? But when the economy improve and there's extra pocket money, that's when publishers say, okay, maybe I will publish a comic book and it's just action, all right? And it's just targeted at young children. So I think that's what we have. And it could be similar in Japan and in America as well, right? So I think the economy is important. But as I was mentioned, even not just in Singapore, but in Malaysia as well, when political situation change, you have the return of the native wit, all right? Which means you have people drawing political cartoons again, but not just political cartoons, but political comics which deal with politics, deal with history. And you know, people ask me, you know, do we see political cartoons in Singapore? I would say, well, if you just define political cartoons as those that appear in newspaper, maybe much less. All right, much less. If you look through Straits Times or 联合早报, you don't find many political cartoons. But if you talk about political comics, yes, you have Art of Charlie Chan by Sunny Liu. Or if you look at the social media, in fact, you have many people drawing some sort of political cartoons or comic strips on Instagram, on Facebook. So actually, it still exists, just that in a different medium, right? But nonetheless, I will argue that it's change and continuity. You still have market influence, external influence, and market forces. All right, they still play a big part, just like the early 20th century or the mid 20th century. All right, so it's well, again, change and continuity is one of the main themes in the study of history. Okay, so right now I'll just look at some images, and the image on the left, all right, Python Gang is actually a comic book that can be found in the National Library of Singapore. So it's one of the earliest comic books that's obviously published. It's not from a newspaper. 1963, all right, thereabouts. And the one on the right is The Amazing Adventures of Captain V, 1988. And both of them are about law and order. It's about how, you know, policemen, in fact, Captain V is a policeman, but in order to, like, you know, fight, I don't know, bigger gangsters or crime, he's actually endorsed, he's actually a superhero for the Singapore Police Force, right? So this comic is actually endorsed by the Singapore Police Force. So this theme of law and order, whether it's 1963 or 1988, right? So action comics, even superheroes, but the theme of law and order. biographies, all right. I talk about nation building. It continues into the 2010. So in fact, what's interesting is the one on the left is actually a Japanese manga. All right, you could see the story and art by a Japanese writer and artist. It's a biography, a comic biography of Lee Kuan Yew. All right, so this was actually published as well as sold in Singapore. And the one on the right is actually is a comic book by Johnny Lau, the creator of Mr. Kiasu. So you can see Mr. Kiasu on the cover on Singapore history. So this was actually produced, and I suppose they're trying to cash in on the Singapore bicentennial in 2019, right? Which is 200 years of coming of the British, right? So they have all these pioneers, right, of Singapore. So another trend, okay, so of course, Art of Charlie Chan by Sunny Liu, which is probably well, if you have not read any Singapore comic, you should read this one. It is very good, but it's a very thick book. It's a very serious book. Not everyone's cups of tea, all right? But I think many people bought it to support the book. But I okay, this is my theory. I don't think many people have finished reading the book. They probably read the first 1/3 of it or 1/4 of it. Because to really enjoy the book, you must really know comic and cartoon history, because they reference a lot to, what happened in the 50s, 60s, for American comics and so on and so forth. So yeah, I'll recommend this. And okay, so actually that is about it for the history part. All right, because I promise you I will present on the history of comics and cartoons in Singapore. But there's a request to talk about comics making, publishing, editing, curating. I mean, these are the things that I do, but to talk more about the current comic industries. Yeah. So before that, any questions about the history part?
Yeah, thank you. So if you have any questions, please feel free to join the conversation. If you don't have it, I have. Okay. So my way of historicizing the post-World War II Singapore comic is quite interesting because, your story is basically a shift from political satire or supplemental contents to the newspaper to the kind of the independent
Commercial, way more commercial, yeah, right?
More commercial or more commodified form of
Yes.
art. So I think that the same narrative can be found in the history of in Japanese manga,
Yes.
It started as a political satire or political supplemental contents to newspaper, and when people read comic books or comic strips or cartoons, they had some sort of political consciousness when they're reading them. But in the post-World War II, and when Japanese economy recovered from the damage from World War II, the people began to enjoy the fictional contents, away from the political implication. So the people began to feel the satire moment, satire element in comic books at some moment in the later half of the 20th century.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I like to do comparisons, and I've looked at, of course, I like to read history about the history of comics in America, in Japan, I mean, out of interest, although my focus is really on Singapore and Southeast Asia, and I find similarities. It is a sort of I mean, of course, there will always be a bit difference, but it is a constant. All right, you move from newspaper to actual comic books or manga books, right? And I was thinking, why is that so? And the answer is in the economy, because people could afford it. People could afford it now. Yeah.
One more thing I found interesting in your story is also people are some elite people in Singapore and Malay Peninsula are educated in United Kingdom, but at the same time people receive DC comics or Marvel comics from the United States. So when I came to so before coming to Malaysia to work for University of Tsukuba, I was not aware of this kind of twist. So I don't know if fully explain this, but to some extent, people in Malaysia and Singapore accept popular culture or commercial culture from the United States, but at the same time, their mindset or their the affection is more on like UK system because probably because the Malay Peninsula is a former colony of British Empire. So I think that I found this is a kind of twist from Japanese perspective. But I'm curious how people in Malaysia and Singapore understand this kind of yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So before I continue, I'll just say that of course, I include Malaysia in because I feel that I cannot talk about Singapore, history of Singapore comics and cartoons. We're not talking about Malaya and Malaysia, but I'm not the authority, right? I am not the authority on. So one day you should invite someone who is really studied Malaysia comics and cartoons to be on this show, right? But what I gave is a very brief and based on research of others as well. Okay, I think yes, definitely a lot of our comic artists, cartoonists were influenced by British comics, because we are former colony of England, of the UK. So actually, things like Beano and Dandy, the weekly comics, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with them. I grew up reading them. When I check with my friends, the older cartoonists, same. And another publication that is very important is called Look and Learn, another British publication. So if you speak to Lat, and Lat is probably the most famous Malaysian cartoonist, right? He talk about Look and Learn. He enjoy reading that, and I think all this helped to spread even after independence. It helped to spread the ideas of Englishness, of even the colony or colonial past in all our young readers. So I remember when I went to England, right? I feel very at home and comfortable. Now, of course, that sounds terrible because I should be post-colonial, but I do feel that hey, I recognize this building, I recognize this street. We have a similar street name in Singapore, but that's how it is. That's history, right? And that's why post-colonial is an ongoing project. But okay, that's a side point. So it's only from the 80s and 90s onwards that increasingly more American culture became very predominant in Singapore. And you just use TV as example. We have a lot of American TV shows, soap opera, MTV, American music. All right. In the 70s, it's still half-half, all right? We have the British charts, British music charts, and then we have the American music charts. But in the 80s, 90s, it was, of course, more Americanized. But of course, it's not just America, right? In the 80s and 90s, I would say there were a group of people who were really into J-pop and J-rock as well, loudness and all that, right? There are some who's into Hong Kong Cantopop, some into Taiwanese, and so on and so forth. So that's why Singapore is an interesting case study because you have what we call rojak, chapalang of things here. But if you talk about English culture or English language culture, yeah, American was on the ascendance in the 90s. Yeah. So of course, American comics were very popular in Singapore, available in Singapore, like Superman, Batman in the 60s and 70s. But it's from the 80s onwards that it's really it overtook British culture. Yeah, in Singapore. Okay, if not, I'll just continue. Yeah, so these are the two anthologies which I co-edited. One, Liquid City, was with Sunny Liu, and more recently, Community was with Paulo. And the book was launched in Manila, in the Philippines last year. This year we did an event in Bangkok, Thailand, so it was launched there, and more recently in Singapore as well at one of the bookshops. So we're slowly trying to promote this book because okay, one thing is, as in all anthologies, there'll be not all stories are great. All right, that's one of the weakness of anthology. But to me, anthologies are a good way to get readers to be familiar or get exposed to new writers, new talent. All right, so maybe I'm very familiar with, let's say, Indonesian comics, right? It's just next to Singapore, but maybe I'm not so familiar with Vietnamese comics or from Myanmar. All right, so we have examples from Myanmar in Community. So yeah, it's a great way of finding out more. So I think I mentioned just now, in the case of Singapore, we did self-publishing instead. We did self-distribution. We also can sell direct to friends and people who are interested at events. Recently, There was a mini book fair. All right. So those are events that you can sell direct. But if you want to reach certain bookshops, then of course you go straight to the bookshop, you let the bookshop take a cut. All right. But like I said, this model is okay for some of us in Singapore. I'm not sure for other countries. I'm not sure. Maybe in Kuala Lumpur, if let's say your book is very niche and you just want to target a few bookshops, all right? You say you are thinking that okay, I do not want to go to popular bookshop. Maybe Kinokuniya, not Kinokuniya, not MPH, but really all the small independent bookshop. Kuniya, Times Bookshop, for example, in KL, I think you need a proper distributor. I think they may not want to talk to you as an individual self-publisher. Yeah. Okay. So I've done editing, publishing, comics making, curating exhibitions as well on Singapore comics, on individual artists, very small shows at bookshops, small spaces. I suppose unlike let's say Japan, and Japan, almost every year there's a major manga exhibition. I think this year is City Hunter. Last year was Clam, right? There's a Clam, the major in Tokyo. I think this year in Tokyo is City Hunter manga. So I think in other parts of the world, it's more accepted. In Singapore, it's very rare to have an exhibition on comic artists. Yeah, unless you're having an exhibition on an artist, all right, fine artist, but he or she does like comics at the site, and then you have a bit of comics there, but this is very rare. Okay, so okay, this is just the same thing on my books. Later I'll show the website for these two so you can see some graphics of these two books I did. Okay, so popular style events on manga. So I also want to talk about okay, before I forget, actually so in the case of Singapore, right? So again, it's interesting. The earlier point I made about how external influences and market forces play a very big part, and it continues to be so. All right. Maybe for other countries, they have their own tradition. I'm sure, like in Japan, manga, right? Or in America or in the UK, all right? American superheroes, or in the UK, 2000 AD, science fiction, Doctor Who, and all that. Singapore, what do we have? We do have local comics, but I think we are quite open or susceptible to outside influence. So definitely we have a group of artists that's very influenced by superheroes, American superhero comics. And then we have a group of artists actually in the 50s, all right? I mentioned, or in the 50s, 60s, 70s, I mentioned things like Beano Dandy, right? And Look and Learn. But actually, there were a group of youngsters, but mostly because they were studying in Chinese schools. So just to clarify, up to the early 80s, up to 1980s, there were still English language schools in Singapore, Chinese language schools in Singapore, and Malay language schools in Singapore, right? So if let's say you're an English school, your math, science, history, geography, it's all taught in English. But if you attend Chinese class, of course, that will be in Mandarin. And similarly, in the Chinese school, all your math, science, history is taught in Mandarin. Then if you attend English lesson, that's be in English. So therefore, you have a lot of Chinese students from Chinese schools buying Chinese comics. All right, they are like magazines. All right, they have current affairs, short stories, pen pal column, and some comics. And these comics were published in Singapore and from Hong Kong. All right, they're very popular. So again, that's one area I'm looking into. I've done a bit of research and writing on that. It's coming out soon. So other than English influences, superheroes, you have Chinese influences, you also have Japanese influences. So this slide is about the popular style and some of the events. And I think manga takes up a big market share. All right. And this artist called Sean Lam. All right. Interestingly, a graduate of NAFA. And his story is quite interesting. He wants to be a mangaka. All right. And he knows that he can't do it in Singapore. So he actually, after graduating from NAFA, I think in the 2000s, he moved to Japan. And he worked in Japanese company, manga company there. Some years ago, he came back and he produced this series, Jiangshi, which is like the Chinese Chinese term for vampires. So it is manga style, but I think if you look at it, it's also not quite manga style, right? It's not 100% manga style. It is his own version of manga. So, okay, before I show you more of my slides, I will show you something else. Okay, so this is just my review of Charlie Chan, and this is a review of Community from the International Journal of Comic Art. So this is a book review. Okay, this is a book review of Nanyang Diplomacy, the one I wrote. So there are some pages here just to give you an idea. Yeah. So I wrote the text. It's drawn by my friend Benjamin Chi. So I call this a fighting manga as well. Now. Not quite manga style, but this one is pure adventure, right? Just pure fighting. Yeah. So I like such things as well. So I also grew up reading a lot of superhero action manga comics. It's like a I don't know, a shonen manga or something. Okay, and this one is on the book, the other book I wrote, Drawn to Satire. I'll just run through very quickly to show you we featured 8 cartoonists, and we only featured pioneer cartoons. So a lot of people ask me, hey, where's Sunny Liu in this? I say, oh, Sunny Liu is not dead yet, so he's not qualified to be in this book. But really, we need a starting point, so I started with a much older cartoonist. So out of the 8, all have passed away, except for Ko Sa-yong, who's in his 80s. All right, and like I say, the earliest to pass away is Zhang Ruji, who was killed during Sokching by the Japanese in 1942. All right, so out of the 8, all Chinese except for 1 Malay artist, and all male except for 1 female artist, Kwan San Mei. All right, when we started doing this book, Ko Sa-yong and Sham were alive. When we did the exhibition last year, Sham passed away. All right, so yep, time and tide waits for no man. Okay, the point to be made is that 8 cartoonists, my friend Hong Teng, who's an artist, managed to imitate their styles in all the 8 stories. So that's quite amazing. So maybe just to give you an example, I'll send out the link, like I say. Okay, so this is by Zhang Ruji. Again, it's about the Great Depression. All right, 1930, yeah. So, okay, this one by Tai Ying Lang. All right. Okay, Liu Kang, this is about the Japanese occupation. All right. Okay, Kwan San Mei. Sham, all right. More social political rather than hardcore political. Humor by Lim Mu Hua. So yeah, so all these things, and this one is on Oil Crisis by Ko Sa-yong. So by the 70s, as I mentioned, it's about local politics. So many of them drew cartoons about international politics by Morgan. Yeah, I think that's about it. And that's me. Okay, so this is a review I did of the second book of Sean Lam's Jiangshi. This is book launch. It's done during COVID. And yeah, so Comics Embassy is the event that we organize as part of SG Cartoon Hub. Yeah, so yeah, just to show some of the images. Right, manga style, but I wouldn't say it's definitely different from manga. It's its own take. Okay, then so maybe I show you this one I thought is interesting. Okay.
I'm a full-time comic artist, a graphic novelist. I write my own stories and I draw my own books. I graduated from NAFA. Before I graduated, I actually sent quite a lot of resumes. I collated my portfolio, with all my works from NAFA, and I did my own short comic strips, and I actually sent to back then in the 90s. I mailed to Japanese publishers, to American publishers, and I was at my last year in NAFA when I received my first invitation from a Japanese publisher. They invited me over for an interview. So after I graduated, I took the chance and I make a trip over and I got the job. I would say about 4 years in Japan. And in the midst of working there, I actually started to receive calls and response from publishers from States. So one of them actually contacted me. I was in Japan, and they would love to work with me. They have a project, and they would want me to. They invited me to work with one of their writers from German. They told me the title is called "It Takes a Wizard," and they would love to. During that time, they were really interested. The Americans, they were really interested in trying to have a fusion of East and West, because manga during the early 2000s is actually booming, and the younger ones, in America, they love manga, and that's when the publishers, they thought, how about, they've been, it's always been Marvel, DC Comics, superhero stuff for so long, and now that the young ones are in Japanese, they would love to try to, they were kind of like exploring the possibility of like putting the East and West together, creating stories using Eastern way of drawing, Japanese manga style, Yeah, and that time they were looking for Asian artists, and I think my portfolio kind of like caught their attention. They kind of like it, and yes, I make a trip.
Okay, I think I'll stop there, but I thought it's an interesting case study, right? So is he a Singapore artist, but he has traveled to work in Japan, and later on traveled to work in America. Then he came back. If you look at this is one of his latest drawing, right? What's Singapore about it? But maybe that's the thing about style, right? Maybe we shouldn't be too fixated with style, right? And maybe you will see similar examples at Comic Fiesta in KL. All right, can you say that this person is not a Malaysian artist or an artist from Malaysia? Yeah, but I thought Sean is interesting. Of course, he has returned back to Singapore, and of course trying to make a living as a full-time comic artist here. Yeah. Okay, so Sean, and actually we have others as well. All right, we have Wee Tian Bing, Celestial Zone. So actually I can show you the video later. We interviewed quite a few on SG Cartoon Hub. Wee Tian Bing also another pioneer, been drawing since the 80s. And we have someone like Fu Sui Chin, who, in fact, to me, Sui Chin is very underrated, very important in the history of Singapore comics, because actually she is the first Singapore artist to be published by an American comic company. It was not Sunny Liu. Sunny Liu wasn't the first. Actually, Sui Chin was the first. It's just that she's not as famous. But Sui Chin also draw in a particular manga style, and she has gone to Japan to try to work as a mangaka. But her experience is quite different, all right? She said that when she draws for Japan, she's criticized for not too Japanese, not being Japanese enough, because the editors will say, hey, this is not quite manga, this is hybrid, right? And when she draws for American companies, they'll say, hey, what you're drawing is too manga, you need to be more westernized and all that. So she's sort of caught in between, right? But we know her for a long time. I think me and Carl, we know her, and this is she's very good. She's very good. She's currently based in.
Can I say something to your story so far? So, like, I found your story so far is very interesting because, like, I was not aware of this kind of transnational flow of talents and contents from Singapore to Japan to the United States. So, like, yeah, but when you say, switching, like the artist, this style is a hybrid of Japanese manga and some local style in Singapore. I found this like hybridity is the attraction of this artist rather than, just saying like, like the criticism she received from Japan is very unfair because I found like, she combined some like Japanese manga style with some like local touch or something she got from like Singapore, from the local is a very like, attractive and interesting. So like, yeah, so I just wanted to say like, that is a very sad because like, for me, this is an attraction, but I don't know that Japan kind of criticized her work like, as a whole.
I think Sui Chin was trying to move into the mainstream manga companies, all the big time Kondasha and all that. So I think for them, I think they wanted a more mainstream style. So I suppose if she had approached a more indie, more alternative, more niche manga company, maybe this would be accepted. Yeah.
But I just wanted to say, I think this kind of hybridity, which is different to the Japanese manga style, is a huge attraction for me. Yeah. Thank you.
That's good. we need more readers like you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I can show more of switching style later on. Okay, so maybe very quickly let's talk about. So actually manga, okay, this is, I chose this because this happened near where I live, all right? Manga events in the heartlands. Heartlands meaning the neighborhood, right? Not in the city area, not in the CBD area in Singapore, right? But in the heartland. So you have these events, even heartland. So of course, you look at it, it's like not many people, but that's because I went quite early. I think by the time I left, maybe there are more people, more cosplayers joining in. But of course, if this took place in the city area, it'd be very, very crowded. It'd be very crowded. Your Anime Fiesta, Asia, your Dojima, your Cos Fest, there's so many events. All right. Singapore Comic Con, which ended 3 weeks ago. That's more American, DC, Marvel, and Image. But you have very specialized that is focusing on manga, anime, cosplay, and even BL. All right, I think the image on the right, you have BL, and yeah. So basically, we are seeing more of that. All right, but of course, it is a mixture of things. It's not just purely stories. A lot of it is stickers, fan art, posters. I suppose they're also inspired by events in Japan like Comic Cat, yeah, things like that. Dojin market, and I think of course BL is big in Asia. You have BL from China at one time. I think that stopped, but Thai BL dramas continue to be very popular. You have also things like coming from Taiwan, so on and so forth, right? Even Indonesia, Malaysia, you have. But of course, they try to circumvent the censors. So it's very, very innovative. So instead of having two men in one poster, you just put them separately, draw them separately, but actually put it together as one poster, but they just make it into two posters. Yeah, and they face each other at the booth. All right. Then of course, okay. Yeah, you can tell it's BL. Yeah, so you have things like that. Okay, I'll show you something else. So okay, so I mean I won't play this video, but actually Kaptum Hub, we also interviewed Wee Tian Bing. In fact, it's like an 8-parter. He had a lot of things to say. He talked a lot. Okay, we also did an interview with Fu Suichin. So these are some of the graphics, short interview. That's how she looks like. Okay, and okay, what's unique? Okay, because you wanted me to talk about comics publishing, trends, the market, some of the events. So I'll talk about the infrastructure as well and the community. And I think what's quite unique to Singapore, and you don't find it in, let's say, Indonesia and Malaysia. That's why they're pretty jealous of us in some ways when I talk to my friends, is that the government do provide funding for comics as part of arts funding, right? It's not just for comics, but it's for arts funding, it's for books, for literature, for theater, for even, okay, film is a different Singapore Film Commission and all that, but it's for books, right? So they have funding, as this funding has been going on for a long time, for many years. And I find that it's good, and yet it's not great. All right. And there are pros and cons of state funding because in some ways the funding gives you like a salary for, let's say, about 6 months to create a comic book. Okay. And that's one category of funding. Then another category of funding is funding for publishing. All right. So you don't have to pay your own costs. Or there's funding for promotion where you can go overseas promote. So there are different baskets. It's quite generous, I would say. And again, none of this in Indonesia and Malaysia. And friends are jealous. But the problem then is that because it's really paid for, right? It's very paid for. So what you have is comic artists or writers here, they end up doing things that they like, which is great, right? I mean, of course, if you're an artist, you want to pursue your vision. But what I find is that, they end up so much doing their own things, they have no market considerations. because I think it's a balance, right? You pursue your vision, but you want your work to be read by other people, right? So it's a balance, but this is like geared towards just one end of the spectrum. So therefore, in Singapore, interestingly, we have quite a fair bit of what I call art comics. All right, like more about my life, autobiographical is very popular. Right? It's like in their 20s, but they're complaining about, right? Life is unfair. My computer broke down. First world problem, right? So autobiography is the mainstream. It's very interesting. As someone who's I enjoy reading comics, right? And I want to promote comics, but what I want is I feel that there should be all kind of comics. All right. So although I like serious comics, I like political comics, I like autobiographical comics like Mouse or Fun Home, they're great. All right. But I also want action comics, I want horror comics, I want manga style comics. You know what I mean? I think by having that whole range, I think it's good for comics as a market, as an industry, as a community, rather than just focusing on one. And I think so that's one issue I identify, like a structural issue. All right, that's one. You can read more about an article I read, I put up later on. And of course, the idea of community. And I go back to this book which I co-edited with Paulo. All right. And really, is it community or conformity or fandom or freedom, right? Sometimes the comics community and events can be stifling, conforming. And again, with limited support given to local talents and comics. Right? And because fandom has their own ideas and definition of what comics and fandom should be. And to me, that is the downside of fandom. All right. So just to give you an example, AFA, all right, Anime Fiesta Asia is doing very, very well. All right. And I think they also have an artist alley and they do support local talents. But again, to me, it's a bit limiting because so I have friends there who sell toys. They are made in Singapore, homemade toys, right? They do well. They sell stickers, they do well. They sell posters, they do well. They sell fan art, they do well. Okay, and there are some doujin groups, all right? They do their own comics. But I would say much less on that. Much less of that. All right. I think up to now, okay, I need to double check because I wrote this book chapter some years ago, and of course it takes forever for academic publishing to really publish the books. All right. I was making the argument that Fu Sui-chin, for example, has never been invited to be a guest of AFA, which is very odd, or maybe it just didn't occur to them, right? Maybe it's not intentionally blocking her, but maybe just the stars are not aligned. But I find that to be a pity that perhaps for some of these events, I think they promote manga, anime, culture. All right. But if you're a cosplayer, I think you'll do well there. If you open a maid cafe, I think you'll do well there. But if you are doing original comic story, the support is limited. Yeah. Or maybe they feel that, there's not much market for it. So again, it's market consideration. So I think fandom, there's a downside. So fandom allows you to express yourself, to construct your own identity as a cosplayer, right? I mean, I think Professor Akiko has done studies in Singapore on that as well. All right. 2.5 world and all that. But there are certain trade-offs. All right. So I will end. I think that's my last point. I'll end on this question that when you talk about community, what is it for? It's for whom and why? Because the community to exist on its own can just be a social group, right? You just meet and you have cakes and coffee and then you just talk about your favorite artists. But what's next, you see? I mean, I suppose it goes back to my research on early cartoons in Singapore, that it is start off as political. All right, it is fighting for a cause. It is some form of activism. Now, I'm not saying that okay, let's go and protest in the streets right now, I mean, but I'm saying that it can serve a bigger purpose. And it could be anything. All right. So let's say I'm a cat dad, I have no kids. Right? But I have cats. They have passed away because they are very old, 17 years old. So I'm very sad. But to me, I will support any cat causes. So that's what I mean, right? If you want to use the community, the comics to support a particular cause, I think it should be allowed, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be political, but it's something that you're passionate about, and it's not just a social club. I find the idea of a social club, comics community is it's kind of self-defeating that you are only emphasizing, promoting consumption, consumerism, capitalism, neoliberalism. You are just showing off your latest acquisition. I bought this, I don't know, Amazing Fantasy number 15. I have this original art from Jim Lee. Yeah, you're just showing off that you have money. That doesn't impress me. What's your purpose in life? Right? What's the agency? What's the meaning to all this? Okay. I think I've gone on too long. But yeah, I welcome questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Lim-san. So like as for your question on fundamental freedom, I have many things to say because I define myself as a cinema scholar, but recently I'm doing my research on fundamental fan community as a kind of potential for the democracy because okay, so from my point of view, the fandom is a kind of depoliticized community in consumer culture and capitalist culture. So as you refer to the history of Singaporean cartoon and comics, the focus was shifted from the political satire, political message to more like a depoliticized message of commercialism. So I think by focusing on the potential of fandom, I think we can convert this direction from depoliticized pleasure capitalism to depoliticize the community. Okay, so the BL is a kind of new practice in which LGBTQ issues or some sort of sexual minorities, the sexual minorities can express their identities and political standpoint. So by fostering the community of BL culture or BL fandom, I think people can deepen their desire in this depoliticized world of consumerism. So that is my hypothetical answer to your question.
Yeah.
So anyways, thank you very much for wonderful talk. And I think we have a Q&A from Professor Hiroshi, Professor Yamato, Carlson, maybe. じゃあ、大和先生お願いします。
Yep. Okay. Thank you for insightful presentation. I really enjoyed, and actually, I'm not really familiar with the old history, but yeah, I learned a lot, I think, today. I just want to confirm that the later part, as you make the comment on the fan event, the convention, it seems like in the Singapore doesn't work as the foundation for comic artists at all. I mean, from your viewpoint, but the one, the Malaysian Comic Festa, I think it is still the support the local artists. Yeah, and that is the ground concept, and as of my knowledge, the committee actually it's come from the Singaporean comic artists. Actually, I don't remember the actual name of the person, but the Malaysian comic artists group up with the Singaporean artists. Then they started the small event in Malaysia. But I just reconfirmed that it's not really don't have that the ground for the artists to grow in Singapore. Yeah.
So maybe to be fair, I mean, I also don't want to overgeneralize, right? I mean, that's what we try not to do in academia or studies. But I think in Singapore's case, okay, I would say it's not, I won't go far to say that it's intentionally limiting or blocking local talents, all right? But it could be the case that it's all market forces, right? If I give you a booth or I rent you a booth and your booth makes a lot of money. And that's good, right? That's good for business. And then I'll do my market study and say, oh, what are the booths that sells a lot? Stickers, fan art, posters, rather than actual original stories and books. So in that sense, they are responding to what audience want. But of course, you could say that, they should be more courageous and say, I'll support local original comics. And then, when I have the books out there, the audience will appreciate it and the audience will buy. But, we are living in a capitalist world, right? It doesn't work that way. And maybe it also could be the case that, some artists will start off by doing original stories, right? But over time, they say, okay, I think it's easier for me to just draw pictures and make stickers out of them. I draw fan art and make posters out of them. It's easier with money. So that could be the case. All right. So I'm not saying that it's an intentional blocking, but it just happened that way. And we should look into it. And of course, we can do further research as to reason why. But I agree with you because I've attended Comic Fiesta for many years, all right, on and off. I didn't go this year. I had something on. But Comic Fiesta is very crowded. It's in fact, I think it's still community run. It's not sold to some big company. All right, a lot of volunteers and all that. And when I visit the Artist Alley, of course you have your usual, stickers, posters, and toys and all that. But you are right, there are a lot of original works being on sale there, and I would say much more than Singapore. So it also could be the case that perhaps the Malaysian market or appetite for such original works are more and bigger than Singapore. That could be the case as well.
Thank you. I have the very same impression to Comic Fiesta in Kuala Lumpur and Comic Frontier in Jakarta. So,
Yeah.
when I visit this kind of comic conventions in Southeast Asia, I see so many, the amateur doujin creators are selling fan merches, the merchandises rather than stories.
Yeah,
so my impression is I would like to read your story, not your stickers. But the many limited number of the vendors are selling their stories. So I was little bit disappointed when I first visited Comic Fiesta, but at some point I switched my mind from disappointment to some different idea because this kind of fan matches are very easy to create. So I'm I see the taste of capitalism and commercialism, but at the same time I feel like this is a very fast step for the amateur creators, especially their teens. This kind of stickers are easy to create, and from this starting point, they can learn how to make their own original works. So in terms of that, I think that is a very fast stage for the new creators to develop their artworks in 10 years or 20 years. So I began to think in the long span.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I see the hand of Professor Hiraishi says.
Yeah, thank you for your wonderful talk. And I have several points, and regarding the conversation just before me, I felt the same thing with Koki. And actually, I visited Comic Fiesta once and Comic Frontier in Jakarta once, and it was very encouraging for the young people joining to that and selling the kind of especially in Jakarta, I found some doujinshi, the original work, but doujinshi, and it was very encouraging. But in Malaysia, I couldn't have time to visit all the stores selling the doujinshi. So, but my question is a bit different. And the first point, I was very impressed that the idea that author's national origin is kind of meaningless in Singapore or Malaysia. It is extremely interesting for me because for example, you have mentioned the name Sonny Liu and Dave Chua. Is Dave Chua the author of Gone Case?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. Okay. So it was kind of surprising because for me, I recognize them as Singaporean, not Malaysian. So it was very interesting. And for example, in Japan, because I'm majoring in literature, Dave Chua is Singaporean, and for some Singaporean Malay, they the Japanese readers or Japanese scholars mentioned to, for example, Alfian Sa'at,
Okay.
who wrote Malay sketches,
Yes.
So Yeah, so in Japan, there's a strong tendency to insist on asking, from where and in what, the nationality and so, and maybe this applies equally to the discussion of Nobel Prize, right? Yeah, if he or she is Singaporean, Malaysian, so yeah, it was very interesting, and yeah, I think it's a very important point to discuss the artists in, for example, in maybe especially in Southeast Asia. Yeah, the national origin is not important for them, but since I'm conduct a research on the aesthetics and technical lineage that connect Japanese manga, Korean manhwa, with Indonesian, especially girls' work, comic works. I found the case of Sean Lam and Sui Chin quite interesting, and I also agree with Koki's view that hybridity is appealing for us, but at the same time, I understand very well why such hybridity did not appeal to Japanese audience or Japanese publisher as well, because they were they are simply seeking some good works as Japanese manga. So I understand that very well as well. But I'd like to ask why, for example, the Sui Tin's case, why Sui Tin's works didn't appeal to Singaporean audience? Because in my research, I'm doing some research on Indonesian works, but in Indonesia, these Indonesian works which have that have hybridity between Indonesian some Indonesian tradition and Japanese manhwa and Korean Japanese manga and Korean manhwa's influence are very well accepted, and they are popular now. So why, for example, maybe Sean Lam's case is it's a successful case, but what happened with the Sui Chin's case?
Okay, I always tell my students that to succeed in life, you need a couple of things, three things basically. Of course, one, you must work hard, right? Two, you must have talent, right? But three, actually, is luck. Luck play a very big part. So in the case of Singapore, it's a very small market. As it is, very few, I mean, you studied novelists, very few novelists are full-time. All right. Even Dave is not full-time. I think Dave has some other gigs, some teaching jobs and all that. He cannot survive on writing. All right. So for comics, it's even worse. I think only Sunny is doing comics full-time because he's like number one, right? And he also does work for America, DC, Marvel, commissions, all that. So actually, for everyone else, it's very hard for them to be a full-time comic book artist. And the same applies to Sui Chin. Okay. I mean, to say that why it's not accepted or is it popular or not popular, it's hard to answer because in the first place, I would argue that comics is not a very popular medium.
Okay.
Right. It's not the most popular. I think gaming is probably the most popular, right? Gaming is probably, or watching Netflix is the most popular entertainment. Reading comics is really not many people read comics. I mean, they will read it, but they read for free. They like to read manga scanlation on their phone, on their devices, on the train. I've seen that. But for them to pay money for a local comic is very rare. All right. They may want to spend money on elsewhere on American comic, say. So therefore, I think Sui Chin has her own fans, but it's not big enough and it's not enough to provide a living for her, right? Yeah, and I would say her style is also quite niche. It's hearing on gothic, environmental issues. Yeah, I mean I like it, but I can imagine why others don't, or someone like Sean style probably is more appealing because it's action. All right, it's fighting empires and all that, right? Switching is more ruminative, more contemplative,
Mhm.
slower, right? Yeah, so it's very different.
Okay. And is there any problem or any issue about distribution? Because for example, as an artist in Malaysia who produces work in a Japanese manga style, manga-esque style, Ogi Sensei mentions Kaoru-san.
Kaoru,
Yeah,
yes.
Kaoru. But however, I have not been able to purchase any of her works in a bookstore in Kuala Lumpur.
Okay.
But despite the fact that they are published by a major publisher,
By
Gembak Starts. So is it because most people buy such works online?
Okay.
Uh,
Okay, I'll tell you which bookshop to go to because actually she's one of the most popular Malaysian
yeah.
artists in Malaysia. So actually you can find her books almost anywhere. Yeah.
But I went to Popular.
Okay.
Yeah, but I couldn't find her works. Yeah,
Oh.
I could find her works with her, how to say again the design of character by Kaoru, but these were not the original works of hers. But online, I could find her works online. So I'm not sure about that, but and actually one of the greatest difficulties I find in Malaysia is the maybe the linguistic how fragmentation. Yeah, so it when I want to buy, for example, I bought some some translations of Japanese manga, but there are Malay translation and Chinese translation and English translation in Popular bookstore in Kuala Lumpur, and the prices are different, and the versions, the size were different. So yeah, it is kind of difficulty for me what to buy, or so the linguistic, as you have mentioned, the linguistic differences, and I'm not sure if the term is correct, but this fragmentation resonates. I ask, it's yeah.
The next time when I'm in KL, we can all go on a shopping trip.
Thank you.
No, actually, I know Cairo. I know the Gembak people. So that my last trip to KL, I visit them. I met up with Cairo and all that. So I suppose it really depends on where you go, right? And
Okay.
I like to say that in Southeast Asia, sometimes there is some sort of linguistic division. So I think in Popular, likely, of course, there are English books and there are Malay books, but most likely there are more Chinese books than anything else, right?
Yeah.
Right. So which means if you want to look for Cairo's books, maybe you need to go to the Chinese section, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And so if you are looking for her books in English, which you can then read, most likely you need to go to Kinokuniya. In KLCC, they would have it. And okay, just to explain the comics publishing in Malaysia, or in the case of Gembak, right? They work by tier. Tier means that, all right, if it's a popular title, it will come out in Malay first, Bahasa Malaysia first, because that is the biggest market. Right? And then after that, they think that okay, there's a market, there's a popular, is popular enough, then it is in Chinese. Right? Because there's still quite a big Chinese population in Malaysia. And then finally, if it's really, really popular, then they may consider English edition, because I think the English readers is less, because most people will read it in Malay and Chinese. So the English one is really small. So there is a tiering in terms of how they go about what's their publishing strategies. That's why I understand when I research on Gembak. Yeah. But
thank you.
yeah, but actually she is very popular. She's
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll continue to look for her, her books in bookshops. Okay. And do you have any comic shops? Are comic shops popular in Singapore or in Malaysia?
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about Singapore first. So Singapore, we still have quite a few American style English comic shops, which means they sell DC, Marvel, Image, toys, and all that. So there are still quite a few. Unfortunately, Chinese comic shops, those that sell translated manga, because of business market changes, they have closed down. So if you want to buy, if you want to buy Chinese translation of Japanese manga, you have to go Kinokuniya. All right.
Okay.
Kinokuniya in Singapore will import this from either Taiwan or Hong Kong. Right. In the past, there was a Singapore company that does its own edition, which means they buy the rights from Japan, all right, and they translate from Japanese to Chinese, and it's a local edition, but that's gone. So some of these American style comic shops I talk about, they also sell English translation of Japanese manga, but it's usually Dark Horse, from Dark Horse, from American companies, from Titan Comics, all that. Yeah. And
Yeah,
in
thank you.
Malaysia, yes, I think similar. But maybe there are one or two American style comic books, not many. Chinese bookshops would sell some of this manga. All right, this Hong Kong, Taiwan, you can find it. And similarly, Kinokuniya in KLCC would have all this American as well as English translation manga as well. Yeah, so actually many, even in Singapore, right, many choose to go Kinokuniya to buy their graphic novels because Kinokuniya offer better price, right?
Yeah.
to buy
Yeah,
in-
I find quite a few American comics in Kinokuniya in Kuala Lumpur.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. That's all for me.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions, Sensei and Yamako Sensei. I think it's time to wrap our conversation. So I would like to say thank you again to CT Lim-san. Thank you for your wonderful talk. I wasn't familiar with Singaporean and Malaysian history of comic strips, but I found okay. So the major characteristics of Singaporean comic book is hybridity and diversity. I found we can simply articulate some the history of Malaysian and Singaporean comic books too. So thank you again, CT Lim-san. Thank you very much.
Ken, thank you. All the best. Have a good lunch. Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you so much.